The Duke recognized her perfume before he even turned his face at the ball.
The air in the grand ballroom was thick with the suffocating scent of 100 different heavy floral perfumes, the standard olfactory uniform of London's high society. But then, cutting through the cloying sweetness of rose and jasmine, came a cold, sharp note. White iris, crushed cardamom, damp cedar. It was a bespoke creation from florists of London, a private recipe he had commissioned himself half a decade ago. The Duke recognized her perfume before he even turned his face. His blood ran cold, the crystal tumbler in his hand suddenly heavy. The woman who wore that scent had been dead for 5 years. The winter of 1895 was bitterly cold, but inside the opulent walls of the Marlborough House on Pall Mall, the atmosphere was stiflingly warm. Sebastian Sterling, the Duke of Westmoreland, stood near the edge of the sprawling dance floor, a masterclass in aristocratic boredom. At 32, he possessed the kind of sharp, angular features that society portraitists loved, though his eyes, a striking, stormy gray, held a permanent shadow. He was the most eligible, and arguably the most cynical, peer in the realm. The orchestra was playing a sweeping Strauss waltz, the string section fighting a losing battle against the sheer volume of aristocratic gossip buzzing beneath the crystal chandeliers. Sebastian took a slow sip of his scotch, his gaze sweeping over the swirling sea of silk, satin, and diamonds. The evening was unfolding exactly as every other winter ball had since his ascension to the dukedom. A parade of eager debutantes paraded before him by ambitious mothers, all of them blurring into an indistinguishable mass of pastel fabrics and rehearsed giggles. He was just about to signal his valet that it was time to retrieve his overcoat and make a quiet exit to his club when it happened. It was not a sight, nor a sound, that shattered the carefully constructed ice around his soul. It was a scent. It drifted past him on a sudden draft from the terrace doors, a scent so entirely out of place among the heavy musks and predictable lavender waters of the British peerage. It was an olfactory ghost, the sharp, earthy bite of damp cedarwood, the exotic spice of crushed cardamom, and the haunting, powdery elegance of white iris. Sebastian's breath caught in his throat. It was a chemical impossibility. In 1889, he had walked into the storied perfumery of Florists of London on Jermyn Street, paid an exorbitant sum of 500 guineas, and sat with their master blender for 3 days to create a fragrance that existed nowhere else on earth. The formula was sealed in a vault at Coutts & Co. Only one bottle had ever been made, and only one woman had ever worn it. His grip on the crystal glass tightened until his knuckles turned entirely white. Clara. But Clara Sinclair was dead. He had stood in the pouring rain at Highgate Cemetery 5 years ago and watched a mahogany casket bearing her name lowered into the unforgiving London clay. He had funded the marble monument himself. He had mourned her until his soul felt like an empty, echoing cavern. The scent grew stronger, pulling at him with an invisible magnetic force. Sebastian turned his head slowly, terrified of what his mind might be conjuring. He expected to see a stranger, perhaps someone who had miraculously stumbled upon a similar botanical combination. Instead, the crowd parted perfectly, as if orchestrated by a cruel and theatrical god. There she stood. She was positioned near a towering pillar of white marble, bathed in the soft, golden light of a nearby candelabra. It was her. There was no mistaking the aristocratic curve of her neck, the midnight dark hair piled elegantly atop her head, or the striking, defiant set of her jaw. But the Clara of his memory had been a creature of soft pastels and innocent laughter. The woman standing 30 feet away was dressed in a gown of midnight blue velvet that looked as expensive as it was unforgiving, adorned with a collar of sapphires that practically radiated wealth. She looked older, hardened, and impossibly beautiful. Sebastian's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The world tilted on its axis, the music fading into a dull, rushing sound in his ears. He took a step forward, dropping his glass. It shattered against the polished parquet floor, a sharp, violent sound that caused a dozen heads to turn. She turned, too, her eyes, a piercing shade of amber, locked onto his. For a fraction of a second, Sebastian saw the mask slip. He saw the flicker of absolute terror, the ghost of the girl he had loved, before a glacial, terrifying calm washed over her features. She did not scream. She did not run. She simply held his gaze across the ballroom, an ocean of secrets lying in the space between them. To understand the sheer impossibility of the moment, one had to go back to the disastrous autumn of 1890. Clara Sinclair was not born to the aristocracy. She was the daughter of a highly successful merchant banker, a man whose wealth rivaled dukes, but whose blood was thoroughly common. In the rigid hierarchy of Victorian London, she was acceptable company, but not acceptable marriage material for the Duke of Westmoreland. Sebastian hadn't cared. They had met in the secluded gardens of the Royal Botanical Society, and their romance had been immediate, consuming, and fiercely private. Sebastian had planned to propose by Christmas. He had commissioned the perfume as a precursor to the ring, a scent entirely her own, symbolizing that she belonged to no one but him. Then came the Barings Bank crisis. In November of 1890, the monumental financial institution teetered on the brink of absolute collapse due to disastrous investments in Argentina. The Sinclair fortune, heavily tied to the bank's ventures, evaporated overnight. Clara's father was not just ruined, he was implicated in a web of fraudulent promissory notes. The scandal was a voracious beast that devoured their reputation in days. The night before Sebastian was to formally announce his defiance of society and marry her, Clara vanished. A week later, a hired carriage was found shattered at the bottom of the chalk cliffs near Dover. Inside the wreckage, authorities found a charred body, identified only by the Sinclair family's signet ring and a melted locket Sebastian had given her. The police ruled it a tragic accident born of a desperate flight to the continent. Sebastian had believed it. The grief had nearly destroyed him, turning him into the cold, untouchable Duke who now stood frozen in the Marlborough House ballroom. Yet here she was, not shattered at the bottom of a cliff, alive. Before Sebastian could cross the floor, the space beside Clara was occupied. A man stepped out of the shadows and placed a proprietary hand on the small of her back. Sebastian stopped dead in his tracks. He recognized the man instantly. It was Charles Winthrop, an American industrialist from Pittsburgh whose ruthless business tactics in the steel industry had earned him a fortune that dwarfed even the oldest British estates. Winthrop was a brute in a tailored tuxedo, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, and dangerously ambitious. He had recently arrived in London, looking to buy his way into the highest echelons of society, wielding his wealth like a blunt instrument. Winthrop leaned in, whispering something into Clara's ear. Clara offered a perfectly rehearsed, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through Sebastian's veins, temporarily eclipsing his shock. He did not care about the hundreds of eyes watching him, nor the scandal he was about to cause. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Winthrop," Sebastian said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise like a serrated blade. The American turned, raising an eyebrow at the sudden interruption. "Westmoreland, I didn't think you mingled in the shallow end of the pool. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Sebastian didn't look at the industrialist. His storm-gray eyes were entirely focused on the woman who was currently suffocating under the heavy scent of crushed cardamom and cedar. "I don't believe I have had the honor of meeting your companion," Sebastian said, the word dripping with a lethal calmness. Clara's amber eyes flickered toward the exit, a trapped animal assessing its escape routes, before settling back on Sebastian. Her chin lifted in a gesture of pure defiance. "Your Grace," Winthrop smiled, a terrifying show of white teeth. "Allow me to introduce my fiancée, Miss Clara. Sterling." Sebastian flinched as if he had been physically struck. Sterling, his own family name. The audacity of it was a slap to the face. "Sterling?" Sebastian repeated softly, the danger in his tone palpable. "A rather distinguished name. We must be related, Miss Sterling. Perhaps we should discuss our shared ancestry. In private." Clara is quite fatigued. Winthrop intervened smoothly, shifting his bulk to block Sebastian's line of sight. We were just about to take our leave. She will stay, Sebastian commanded. The authority in his voice was absolute, the centuries of aristocratic breeding rolling off him like a physical weight. The surrounding guests had begun to notice the tension. Silence was rippling outward from their corner of the room. Clara placed a gloved hand gently on Winthrop's arm. "It is all right, Charles," she said. Her voice was exactly as Sebastian remembered it, a low, melodic contralto that sent a fresh wave of agony through his chest. "I will grant the Duke a few moments. We wouldn't want to cause a scene in front of the Duchess of Marlborough." Winthrop narrowed his eyes, clearly unhappy, but gave a curt nod. 5 minutes, Westmoreland. Then her carriage leaves. Sebastian didn't wait for permission. He stepped forward, offered his arm to the ghost of the woman he loved, and felt a jolt of electricity when her hand settled lightly upon his sleeve. He led her away from the crowded ballroom, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of Marlborough House until they reached the private library. It was a cavernous room, lined with mahogany bookshelves and smelling faintly of old paper and leather. He shut the heavy oak doors behind them, throwing the iron bolt into place with a sharp clack. They were alone. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence in the library was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the crackle of the fire in the hearth. Sebastian stared at her, devouring the sight of her. The curve of her cheek, the steady rise and fall of her chest beneath the velvet. He wanted to scream. He wanted to fall to his knees. He wanted to shake her until she explained how she had resurrected herself. "You're alive," he finally whispered, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its aristocratic polish. "I buried you, Clara. I stood in the rain, and I put you in the ground." Clara remained near the center of the room, keeping a careful distance. She did not break down. She did not rush into his arms. Instead, she removed her long silk gloves, finger by finger, revealing pale hands completely devoid of jewelry. No signet ring, no melted locket. "You buried a poor maid from a local inn who had the tragic misfortune of being caught in a carriage fire," Clara said, her voice frighteningly devoid of emotion. "I traded clothes with her. It was the only way the authorities would stop looking for me." "Why?" Sebastian took a step forward, his chest heaving. "Why would you do this? The Barings crisis. I told you I didn't care about the money. I would have paid your father's debts. I was going to marry you." "You couldn't have paid those debts, Sebastian," she replied quietly, "because they weren't held by the bank. They were held by someone much closer to home." Sebastian stopped. "What are you talking about?" Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time, a fracture appeared in her glacial facade. "Your mother, the Dowager Duchess." The name hit Sebastian like a physical blow. His mother, Beatrice Sterling, was a formidable woman who ruled the family estate with an iron fist and a terrifying devotion to their bloodline's purity. "2 days before we were to be married," Clara continued, her amber eyes locking onto his, "your mother paid a visit to my father. She possessed forged promissory notes, highly illegal, highly treasonous documents that implicated my father in embezzling funds from the Crown's own accounts at Coots & Co. She had paid a fortune to have them fabricated." "No," Sebastian breathed, shaking his head. "My mother is ruthless, but she wouldn't." "She told my father," Clara interrupted, her voice rising in volume, "that if I did not disappear forever, she would hand the documents to Scotland Yard. She assured me, to my face, that my father would not just be ruined. He would be tried for treason and hanged at Newgate Prison. And you, Sebastian, would be dragged down with the scandal of loving a traitor's daughter." Sebastian felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The betrayal was so profound, so deeply rooted in his own blood, that it literally made him dizzy. He leaned against a heavy mahogany reading desk to steady himself. "So you staged your death," he said, the pieces falling into horrifying alignment. "I took what little cash I had, bought a steerage ticket to America, and vanished." Clara confirmed. I assumed the name Sterling as an insurance policy. A small, petty revenge, perhaps. But it kept me alive in New York. And Winthrop? Sebastian spat the name, the jealousy flaring hot and bright again. How does a thug from Pittsburgh factor into this tragedy? Clara looked away, staring into the flames of the hearth. Because my father didn't die, Sebastian, and your mother didn't destroy those forged notes after I left. She kept them as leverage, a guarantee I would never return. But a year ago, your mother needed capital for the railway expansion in India. She sold off a portfolio of debts to Charles Winthrop. Sebastian's blood ran cold. Winthrop holds the forged notes. Clara nodded slowly. He recognized my father's name from his business dealings in London. He found me in New York. He told me that if I did not return to London with him, act as his fiancé, and legitimize his entrance into British society through my connections, he would execute the notes. He would finish what your mother started. Sebastian stared at the woman he loved. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a hostage. She was wearing a velvet cage, paraded in front of the man she loved by a ruthless industrialist, holding her father's life in the balance. And you wore the perfume tonight, Sebastian realized, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. The florists blend, knowing I would be here. Clara finally looked back at him, a single tear breaking free and tracing a glittering path down her cheek. I had to know if you would recognize me, she whispered. I had to know if the ghost of Mayfair still haunted you, your grace, because if you still loved me, I need you to help me steal those notes back tonight. The silence in the library of Marlborough House was entirely deafening, save for the rhythmic, aggressive ticking of a Louis XIV brass clock upon the mantelpiece. Sebastian stared at Clara, absorbing the colossal weight of her request. She was not asking him to simply love her again. She was asking him to commit grand larceny against one of the most powerful industrialists in the Western Hemisphere, a man who currently held her father's life in the breast pocket of his tailored evening coat. Tonight, Sebastian repeated, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. You want to steal them tonight? With the Prince of Wales in the very next room and half of Scotland Yard standing guard at the gates? It has to be tonight, Clara insisted, stepping closer. The intoxicating scent of white iris and crushed cardamom washed over him, momentarily clouding his senses. Tomorrow morning, Charles has arranged a meeting with Lord Rothschild. He intends to use the forged Coutts & Co. documents to prove my father's supposed treason, thereby forcing the Sinclair estate into absolute receivership. Once he controls the remnants of my father's bank, he will have the leverage he needs to force a marriage before the Archbishop of Canterbury. If we do not secure those papers before dawn, Sebastian, I am lost to him forever, and my father will hang. Sebastian's jaw tightened. The storm gray of his eyes darkened into something far more dangerous. He reached out, his gloved fingers lightly tracing the cold sapphire collar around her neck. It felt like a chain. Where does he keep them? He is residing at the newly opened Savoy Hotel on the Strand, Clara whispered, her eyes darting toward the heavy oak doors, terrified of Winthrop's sudden appearance. Suite 412. It overlooks the Thames. Charles is deeply paranoid. He does not trust the banks in London, nor does he trust his own staff. He keeps a heavy iron Chubb and Sons strongbox in the wardrobe of his bedchamber. The combination is his late mother's birth year, 1842. But Sebastian, she caught his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. He employs armed Pinkerton men from America. They stand guard in the hotel corridor day and night. Pinkertons, Sebastian scoffed softly, a dark, aristocratic arrogance flaring to life in his chest. Let them try to stop a duke in his own city. You must return to the ballroom. You must dance with him, smile for the gossips, and keep him entirely occupied until the clock strikes 1. Can you do that? I have spent 5 years pretending to be a ghost, Clara said, her voice trembling but her amber eyes fierce. I can pretend to be a devoted fiancé for 3 more hours. With a sudden, desperate hunger, Sebastian pulled her against his chest. He did not care about the sapphires, the velvet, or the 5 years of agony. He pressed his lips to her forehead, breathing in the scent that had haunted his nightmares and dreams alike. "I will not lose you again, Clara. I swear it, on my title, my blood, and my life." 10 minutes later, Sebastian was standing in the freezing courtyard of Marlborough House, his breath pluming in the icy winter air. He bypassed his own crested carriage and instead hailed a nondescript hansom cab, slipping a gold sovereign to the driver. "The Savoy Hotel. And do not spare the horses." The journey through the fog-choked streets of London was a blur of gaslight and shadows. The Savoy Hotel, however, was a beacon of impossible modernity. Opened just a few years prior, it was the first public building in the world to be lit entirely by electricity. As Sebastian stepped out of the cab, the glaring, brilliant illumination of the entrance momentarily blinded him. It was a palace of new money, dripping with gilded brass, red velvet, and the distinct, brassy arrogance of American wealth. Sebastian pulled his silk top hat low over his eyes and turned up the astrakhan collar of his overcoat. He did not go to the front desk. Instead, he navigated the opulent lobby with the absolute entitlement of a man who owned half of Mayfair. He bypassed the famous ascending rooms, the electric elevators that were the talk of the city, knowing they were operated by attendants who might remember his face. Instead, he took the sweeping marble staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time, his mind calculating the odds of a violent altercation. The 4th floor was heavily carpeted, absorbing the sound of his footsteps entirely. As Clara had promised, standing outside the double mahogany doors of Suite 412 was a man who looked distinctly out of place among the floral wallpaper. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a poorly tailored suit that bulged suspiciously near the armpit. A Pinkerton agent. Sebastian did not hesitate. He did not skulk in the shadows. He walked directly toward the man with the furious, clipped stride of an insulted aristocrat. "You there?" Sebastian barked, projecting the full, terrifying authority of the Duke of Westmoreland. "Are you Winthrop's man?" The Pinkerton agent blinked, momentarily taken aback by the sheer audacity of the approaching gentleman. "Hold on a minute, buddy. You can't be up here." "Do not speak to me in that utterly pedestrian tone," Sebastian snapped, stopping inches from the man's face. He pulled a silver cigarette case from his pocket, his movements sharp and aggressive. "Your employer has just caused a monumental scandal at Marlborough House. He has insulted the Prince of Wales, spilled claret on the Duchess of Devonshire, and sent me here to retrieve his secondary checkbook to pay off the damages before the palace guards arrest him. Now open this door, or I will ensure you are deported to New York by breakfast." The guard hesitated, his hand hovering near his lapel. He was trained to stop thieves, not furious British nobility wielding the name of the future king. The sheer arrogance of Sebastian's demand short-circuited the man's protocol. "Mr. Winthrop didn't say nothing about," the guard stammered. "Mr. Winthrop is currently being detained in a coat closet by the Royal Equerry," Sebastian roared, tapping his silver cane against the floor. "Open the damned door, man, before we are all ruined." Flustered and entirely out of his depth in the rigid hierarchy of British society, the guard fumbled for a master key and unlocked the suite. "Just make it quick. I ain't supposed to let nobody in." "Wait in the hall," Sebastian ordered, stepping into the dark suite and slamming the door in the man's face. He threw the deadbolt. He was in. The suite was a sprawling testament to Winthrop's ego, decorated with heavy mahogany furniture and expensive imported rugs. Sebastian moved with lethal efficiency, relying on the ambient glow of the electric street lamps outside the window. He moved straight to the bedchamber, throwing open the doors of the massive walnut wardrobe. There it was, the Chubb & Sons strongbox, heavy iron, virtually indestructible, sitting squat and ugly among Winthrop's immaculately tailored suits. Sebastian knelt, his heart hammering against his ribs. He spun the cold brass dial. 1, 8, 4, 2. With a heavy, mechanical clunk, the internal tumblers aligned. Sebastian pulled the heavy handle, the hinges groaning softly in the quiet room. He reached inside, his gloved hands feeling for the crisp parchment of the Coutts & Co. promissory notes. His fingers met nothing but velvet lining. Sebastian froze. He pulled a small box of lucifer matches from his pocket, striking one against the iron safe. The brief flare of sulfur illuminated the interior of the strongbox. It was entirely empty, save for a single, crisp calling card resting in the center. Sebastian picked it up, holding the match closer. In elegant, mocking script, it read, "A gentleman never leaves his most valuable possessions out of his sight. Enjoy the ball, Your Grace." C. Winthrop. The match burned down to Sebastian's fingertips, extinguishing with a hiss against his leather glove. Winthrop had anticipated this. He was not a fool. He knew Clara might attempt to enlist help, and he knew a man of Sebastian's resources could breach a hotel room. The forged notes were not in the Savoy. Sebastian stood up slowly, the blood roaring in his ears. He looked at the row of tailored evening coats hanging above the safe. He remembered Clara's words. He has the leverage he needs to force a marriage. Winthrop wouldn't leave the notes behind because he intended to use them as a weapon at all times to keep Clara in line. He has them on him, Sebastian realized, a cold dread washing over him. They are at the ball. Right now, he checked his pocket watch. It was midnight. He had 30 minutes before Winthrop planned to leave Marlborough House and take Clara away forever. Sebastian bolted from the room, leaving the safe wide open, bypassing the confused Pinkerton guard in the hall without a word, and throwing himself back into the unforgiving London night. The real heist had not even begun. The grand clock in the main hall of Marlborough House chimed the 3/4 hour, 12:45. The orchestra had transitioned to a slow, melancholic nocturne, signaling that the evening was drawing to its inevitable, exhausted close. Near the grand, sweeping staircase, Charles Winthrop was draped in a heavy, fur-lined cape, looking every inch the conquering emperor. Beside him stood Clara. Her face was ashen, her eyes darting frantically toward the main doors. Every time a footman passed, she flinched. Winthrop's grip on her arm was tight, bruising, a physical manifestation of his absolute control. "He isn't coming back, my dear," Winthrop murmured, leaning close to her ear. "The Duke of Westmoreland is a man of the establishment. He plays by the rules, and the rules say, 'You belong to me now. Let us return to the Savoy. Tomorrow, we secure your father's legacy under my name.'" Clara closed her eyes, a single tear escaping to freeze upon her cheek. She had risked everything to wear the florist perfume, hoping to awaken the ghost of the man she loved. But perhaps Charles was right. Perhaps the Duke she knew had died 5 years ago, buried under the weight of his own family's treachery. "I am ready, Charles," she whispered, her voice devoid of life. They took 2 steps toward the exit before the heavy mahogany doors of the grand hall violently swung open, letting in a blast of freezing winter wind that caused the nearby candelabras to flicker and die. Sebastian Sterling stood in the threshold. He was breathing heavily, his overcoat damp with London fog, his top hat missing, and his normally immaculate hair falling over his stormy gray eyes. He did not look like a duke. He looked like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. The ambient chatter of the departing aristocrats died instantly. Dozens of peers turned to watch as Sebastian strode directly toward the American industrialist. Winthrop sneered, puffing his chest out. "Ah, Westmoreland, you missed the final waltz. Have you come to bid my fiancé a proper farewell?" Sebastian stopped 3 feet away. He did not look at Clara. His eyes were entirely locked onto Winthrop's chest, specifically the left interior breast pocket of his tailored coat. "I have come to discuss a business transaction, Mr. Winthrop," Sebastian said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "A trade. To be conducted immediately in the Dowager Duchess's private parlor down the hall, unless you would prefer to discuss your fraudulent empire in front of the Prince of Wales." Winthrop's smile faltered, just a fraction. I have no idea what you are talking about. Move aside. Suite 412 at the Savoy, Sebastian said. His voice dropping to a low, lethal timbre meant only for Winthrop's ears. A lovely strongbox, quite empty, which means the forged Coots & Co. Promissory notes you bought from my mother are currently resting against your heart. Shall we step into the parlor? Or shall I have my footman hold you down and strip you of your coat in front of the entire British peerage? Winthrop's eyes flashed with genuine panic. He looked at Clara, realizing her betrayal, before looking back at the Duke. He weighed his options. A public brawl would ruin his chances of entering society, regardless of the notes. 5 minutes. Winthrop hissed. Sebastian led them down a darkened corridor, pushing open the doors to a small, private parlor. A fire was roaring in the hearth. Seated in a high-backed leather chair, looking entirely displeased by the intrusion, was Beatrice Sterling, the Dowager Duchess of Westmoreland. Sebastian! Beatrice snapped, adjusting her diamond spectacles. What is the meaning of this? Why are you parading this American brute and this ghost into my parlor? Beatrice stared at Clara, her ancient face draining of color. She recognized the girl she had forced into exile 5 years ago. You, Beatrice whispered, clutching her cane. How dare you return here? Silence, mother, Sebastian commanded. The sheer venom in his voice shocked the old woman into compliance. He turned his attention back to Winthrop. You hold documents that implicate Clara's father in a treasonous fraud against the crown, Sebastian stated, pacing the room like a caged tiger. Documents that my own mother forged to protect our so-called pure bloodline. You intend to use them to steal Clara, steal her father's remaining assets, and buy your way into my world. That is exactly what I intend to do, Winthrop replied, recovering his bravado. He reached into his coat, pulling out a folded leather portfolio. He tapped it against his palm. And there is nothing you can do to stop me. You cannot report me to the police without ruining the girl's father. You cannot kill me without hanging for it. You have lost, Duke. I am the Duke of Westmoreland, Sebastian said, stopping his pacing. The frantic energy suddenly bled out of him, replaced by a terrifying, glacial calm. I do not need to rely on the police. I rely on the Bank of England. Sebastian reached into his own coat pocket and produced a single, sharply creased piece of telegram paper. He tossed it onto a silver tray resting on the coffee table. I spent the last hour at the Savoy. Yes, Sebastian said smoothly. But when I realized your safe was empty, I did not immediately return here. I took a detour to the private residence of Lord Rothschild. A close, personal friend of my late father. Winthrop's bravado cracked. He stared at the telegram on the silver tray. You see, Winthrop, you made a critical error when you decided to blackmail an English duke in his own city, Sebastian continued, his voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. You purchased my mother's debt, using heavily leveraged capital from your steel foundries in Pennsylvania. You assumed your American empire was secure. It was not. At 1:15 this morning, Lord Rothschild, acting on behalf of the Westmoreland estate, executed a hostile buyout of your primary creditors in New York. We bought your debts, Winthrop. Every single one of them. Winthrop lunged for the telegram, his hands shaking as he read the cryptographic confirmation from the financial houses. If you do not hand me that leather portfolio right now, Sebastian whispered, leaning in close, I will send a return wire to New York, instructing them to call in your debts immediately. You will be bankrupt before the sun rises over the Atlantic. Your foundries will be sold for scrap. You will have nothing but those forged papers, which will be entirely useless to a man who cannot afford a steerage ticket back to America. Winthrop was hyperventilating, his face purple with rage. He looked at Beatrice, who was shrinking into her chair, realizing her own son had just outmaneuvered a titan of industry. He looked at Clara, who was staring at Sebastian with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. You would burn your own family fortune to ruin me? Winthrop asked, his voice cracking. I would burn London to the ground, To keep her safe, Sebastian replied, his gray eyes completely devoid of mercy. The papers. Now. With a trembling hand, utterly defeated by the invisible, crushing weight of generational wealth and power, Winthrop handed over the leather portfolio. He did not say another word. He turned on his heel and fled the parlor, a broken king retreating into the night. Sebastian did not even open the portfolio. He walked directly to the roaring fireplace. "Sebastian! No!" Beatrice screamed, struggling to stand up. "Those notes are our leverage. They are worth a fortune. You cannot—" "You are no longer the Duchess of this family, Mother," Sebastian said, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "Tomorrow, you will pack your belongings and retire to the Dower House in Cornwall. If you ever set foot in London again or speak Clara's name, I will cut off your allowance and leave you to the mercy of the workhouses." Without a second glance at the woman who had caused him half a decade of agony, Sebastian tossed the leather portfolio into the flames. Clara gasped as the fire caught the dry parchment. The forged promissory notes curled, blackened, and disintegrated into ash. The heavy chains of the past 5 years burned away in a matter of seconds, floating up the chimney and disappearing into the London sky. Sebastian turned around. He looked exhausted, stripped of his cynical armor, finally just a man standing before the woman he loved. Clara crossed the room, the midnight blue velvet of her gown sweeping across the Persian rug. She didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in the cold, damp wool of his overcoat. Sebastian caught her, lifting her off the ground, burying his face in her dark hair, inhaling the sharp, beautiful scent of white iris, cedar, and cardamom. "You recognized my perfume," she sobbed softly against his shoulder, the tears finally flowing freely. "I recognized my soul," Sebastian whispered back, holding her so tightly he thought he might break her. "And I am never letting it go again." The tale of the Duke and his resurrected Duchess remains one of the most guarded secrets of London's high society, a testament to the fact that true love cannot be buried, and betrayal always meets its match in the fires of vengeance. Clara and Sebastian's story proves that the deepest connections are not bound by logic, but by the undeniable scent of destiny. If this thrilling journey through the scandalous ballrooms of 1895 London left you breathless, don't let the story end here. Like this video to support more dramatic historical retellings, share it with your fellow romance lovers who appreciate a good heist, and hit that subscribe button with the notification bell turned on so you never miss a plot twist. Let us know in the comments below, what scent would immediately remind you of your true love? Until next time, stay romantic.